ADHD can indeed impact your life. Have you ever felt that if you had the courage to act exactly as you think, everything would be different? People would respect and admire you? Many adults with ADHD are wasting precious time in life because they can't break free from the cycle of self-sabotage. But I developed a method that changed my game, and I'm going to teach it to you in the first link in the description.
What is ADHD? Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. In this video, I'm going to explain the definition of ADHD, what it is, what the types are, what the origin is. I'm going to explain everything to you in detail, and at the end, I'll share some interesting facts about ADHD. So stick around until the end. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Yuri Maya from ADHD Uncomplicated. I have ADHD, and here you will learn everything about the disorder in an uncomplicated way. Made by someone who feels what you feel firsthand, or your child feels it firsthand too. In addition, I have a postgraduate degree in neuropsychology and learning disorders. ADHD is a neurobiological disorder, meaning it's a disorder that affects the natural biology of the brain of those who have it, and its cause is not well defined. However, the origins are already well known by science, and I'm going to explain the difference between what is cause and what is origin. The cause is when you know exactly what causes it, a specific disorder or pathology. For example, people who have Down syndrome. It is known that the cause is the trisomy of chromosome 21. When we talk about the origin of a certain disorder, we say that there are several factors and various issues that initiate a specific disorder. Therefore, we know that the main origin of ADHD is genetic. It mainly comes in the vast majority of cases, hereditarily. However, there are cases where ADHD does not arise hereditarily. I'm going to explain that too. In this case of genetic origin, we know that a person with ADHD has a genetic predisposition, and this genetic predisposition is associated with the action of two neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. There are some genes that are associated with the transport of these neurotransmitters within our brain, which are related to ADHD. However, studies show that when your ADHD is of genetic origin, the environmental factor has a strong influence on the emergence, or even the worsening, the intensification of ADHD symptoms. For example, a mother who smokes during pregnancy or a mother who consumes alcohol is also associated, as I mentioned, with the genetic predisposition of the fetus, the child that is going to be born. In addition, studies show that prematurity is also a factor that triggers and intensifies ADHD. Another situation that has a big influence is a conflictual environment. Especially in the early years, like for example, a bad situation with separated parents or a lot of fighting at home, situations where the child feels guilty for the family conflicts, especially, all of these are situations that can worsen the symptoms. And when it's not of genetic origin, it can also be triggered by some brain injury or some abnormality in the formation of the person's brain. I personally met a young man at a lecture I gave some time ago, that he developed ADHD at 22 or 23 years old, because he had a small benign nodule in the prefrontal cortex, which I will talk about soon, and he had surgery to remove it, and afterwards he started showing symptoms of ADHD. He didn't have it, but that surgical injury triggered him to have the disorder. And remember that the term disorder is not a disease. It doesn't incapacitate the person. It means that we indeed have all the full mental capacities. However, its functioning is a bit out of the ordinary. And this out-of-the-ordinary functioning causes various setbacks in our lives. Social setbacks, performance setbacks, and everything else. The symptoms that I will mention now for you. And the main symptoms of ADHD can be, first, excessive agitation, often out of control, which causes setbacks in your daily life. Because our mind is poorly supplied with these neurotransmitters, especially in the prefrontal cortex region. Many of these neurotransmitters, such as dopamine, are responsible for our focus and our cognitive performance. It makes us very much at the mercy of the slightest stimuli around us. Even if you start focused on something important, you can easily lose focus. Distractions like someone entering or outside noise can divert your focus, making it hard to refocus. You switch activities quickly. If anything else comes up, it could be, I don't know, someone walking through the door, some noise coming in through the window. Anything can easily divert your focus, and it will be very hard for you to get back on track. You switch activities with extreme ease and speed, causing this behavior of anxiety and agitation. Difficulty starting and staying on boring and tedious tasks such as this makes it so that when we come across a task, an activity that will drain a lot of our vital energy, that we will have to put in a lot of effort to stay focused. Unlike a neurotypical person who doesn't need to put in as much effort, it makes us have this aversion. And we are well known for being chronic procrastinators as a group. We get up all the time, we avoid what's important, we get up to go to the bathroom, to take a shower, to drink water, to check what we're doing, to take a quick look at YouTube. On WhatsApp, you do this all the time, every moment, and that activity you plan to start at 2 in the afternoon is now 6 o'clock and you haven't even started yet. So, procrastinating is up to you. Inattention above the average, to details, to the minutiae, as long as the task isn't interesting. There's an immaturity, an above average chronological immaturity, meaning a 10-year-old with ADHD often has the mindset of a 7-year-old. This tends to correct itself in adulthood. At 8 years old, this tends to correct itself in adulthood. But until around 25 or even 30 years old, you still carry this immaturity compared to people of the same age. And usually, the disorder is associated with some comorbidity, such as, for example, ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and several other disorders that can also be associated. In 60% of cases, ADHD doesn't appear alone. And how does ADHD affect the brain? Specifically, there's an undersupply and structural brain issues. Small brain differences exist. Symptoms are driven by low dopamine and serotonin. There are some small physical and structural differences in the brain. But basically, what drives it the most, what causes the symptoms to appear, is the low supply of two neurotransmitters, mainly dopamine and serotonin. So they act in this part here at the front of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which makes us react to what's happening right now. Reacting to sounds, reacting to what we see, causing a reflex, making us react. For example, I need to grab a glass of water that's on the table. So you feel thirsty, and that makes you have to get up, have to act, and get there. All the way across the room to grab a glass of water. Anyway, everything you're experiencing right now and responding to in real time is happening here, present in the prefrontal cortex. And there's also a difficulty regarding the back part of the brain. That is located at the back, where your oldest memories are stored. The things you've already experienced and that you already have, you do them automatically. In other words, what you're seeing and reacting to right now belongs to the prefrontal cortex. And here, the things you've already learned that you're well consolidated in, like for example, walking, talking, running, driving, those are all things you do automatically. Really, this difficulty in prioritizing and giving the proper importance to stimuli. You have this all the time indeed. That's why you're constantly trying to get back on track. It can be explained, for example, by that experiment at the bar. When you're in a very noisy bar and you have some people at your table, you can focus on the conversation at your table. At least partially you can. Now, when you have ADHD, especially at the more severe levels, you have a lot of difficulty really being present, physically present, mentally present in what is being said to you. You get distracted by the conversation next to you, which is more interesting, or if someone runs by, you get sidetracked and completely lose what the person is saying. What makes you be seen as someone rude, who doesn't care anyway? All kinds of negative reactions can come from these little symptoms. ADHD also affects our working memory, such as our operational memory. As I just explained a little while ago, working memory, it's that memory that allows you to associate things happening now with the knowledge you already have from the past. And this working memory is located in this region that separates the prefrontal cortex from the back part of the brain. For example, you already know how to drive a manual car, but then you have to drive an automatic car without anyone teaching you anything. You're going to associate what you already know about driving. You already know that you have to press the light brake. You already know to turn left. You already know to turn left, to the right, to the right. You already know how to drive. But how is it to drive a car without a clutch? How are you going to drive with that gear shift? Weird. With a bunch of letters, a bunch of numbers that you haven't learned yet. So, at that moment, when you're learning something new, associating it with prior knowledge, you're using your operational memory or working memory, and these new connections from the new learning you're experiencing are hindered by the low presence of these neurotransmitters, especially when this learning is something that isn't interesting to you. This means that you need, for example, to read a book 3 or 4 times to be able to learn something that your classmate doesn't need to do in theory. Now, when it comes to playing a video game, a game that you like, you can perform much better than average. Anyway, you can play with a lot of ease. What causes this certain intrigue in people? We also have difficulty pacing activities, doing tasks that require a logical sequence to be completed. This also relates, for example, when a mother tells her child to clean their room, go clean your room. And then she goes in there and scolds him because the room isn't clean. Why? In that child's mind, who is always spaced out and has their mind racing 1,000 miles an hour, when they go to their room, what does cleaning the room mean to them? Stretching the sheet, putting the shoes behind the door, and that's it. But he doesn't know that cleaning the room also means putting the toys in the toy drawer. Putting the clothes in the dirty laundry basket anyway, organizing the shelf. Yes, that is cleaning the room. In other words, this checklist, this step-by-step process, this pacing becomes very complicated for people with ADHD. And I gave an example from childhood, but in adulthood, it's the same. When you, for example, are in a job that requires you to do certain tasks that are very sequential, with many complex steps, if you don't carry a little notebook with your notes, it's unlikely that you'll be able to perform like other people. There are also different types of ADHD and various levels of severity of ADHD, such as the types include the predominantly inattentive type. This one I mentioned is the most concerning type of ADHD, the predominantly inattentive type. Why? It's that person who, especially in childhood, doesn't cause any trouble. So she goes unnoticed. People don't realize that she has ADHD and she doesn't start any kind of treatment. They often don't have a diagnosis, usually receiving a late diagnosis, and it affects 3/4 of the people who have the inattentive type are women. It's a subtype, that is much more present in women. So it's that person who doesn't cause trouble, who doesn't make a mess in class. In other words, no one thinks they have ADHD, so to speak. We think we're studying, that we're doing what we need to do, but when the grades come in, where are the grades? Sometimes they don't finish the test. They can't complete the whole test. They can't study like they should, but everyone thinks the person is studying. And then the person starts to feel dumb, suffering from bullying, that difficulty, without getting the proper treatment. It's that person who is sitting there looking at the teacher, but not really paying attention. Actually, she's traveling in her own world, interior. There's the combined type, which is the most common type that combines traits of inattention and also hyperactivity. That's where the great motor agitation comes from, thoughts, talking, and acting. In other words, that impulsivity, where you don't have your common sense well adjusted. Are you hyperactive? They speak without thinking, sometimes ending up offending people, interrupting and trampling over others. They also act without thinking, making social blunders all the time, especially social gaffes. And these are people who, in fact, have a lot of difficulty memorizing social rules. It's the most common type mainly because it rarely goes unnoticed. There's also the predominantly hyperactive type, which is harder to find. Some books don't even mention this type because these are people who don't show the trait of inattention. They can focus on what they need to do, but they have a trait of hyperactivity, causing difficulties in their daily life, always very present. And also, regarding the intensities, there are milder, moderate, and high severity cases, which basically relates to the intensity of these symptoms, the way and the time they remain in action in your daily life and in the places where you are, and also the level of impairment this brings to you and to the other people around you. A curiosity, many people tend to associate ADHD with hyperactivity. And that's a myth. Sometimes you see reports saying things like hyperactive child, I don't know what. That's a myth because the main symptom of ADHD is inattention. It's the most prominent symptom. And so hyperactivity alone can even be like another pathology, another issue. Like, for example, a child or even an adult who is going through a major stressful situation, and then with high levels of anxiety, they can't do anything, just walking around the house all the time, worried, busy with 1,000 things, and then you think that person might be hyperactive when in fact they're not. ADHD is the most studied mental disorder in the world. In other words, it's far from being considered a myth or an invention of the pharmaceutical industry. Cross that out. It's a disorder that is also present in 3/4 of the cases, regardless of the level or type it may be, in men. It's a disorder that is much more common in males and often gets passed down from the father. More easily, let's say. I know that I inherited traits from my mother, but that's not the most common. Write in the comments if there's anything I mentioned about ADHD that you didn't know. What did you find most interesting to discover in this video? And when you write in the comments, don't forget, Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell because that way you'll receive more content like this, and it also helps me out on YouTube. And thank you very much. And until next time.
ADHD, stop blaming others. Unfortunately, your parents, teachers, colleagues, they may have been hard on you, but you need to stop blaming them to develop your self-responsibility and finally take off in life. I also went through all of this and suffered into adulthood, but I developed a method to put an end to it. You can access this method in the first link in the description.